البلاد أنا اليوم نحكي معاك باسمي واسم الشعب الكل اللي عايش بالأحلام 2011 ما زال فما شكون يموت بالجوع حاب يخدم باش يعيش لكن
Hello everybody. Okay. Zuerst eine Frage an die Deutschsprecher und sonst gibt es, diese Veranstaltung wird auf Englisch stattfinden. Gibt es jemand hier, der Englisch nicht verstehen kann? Good. Now we'll go into it. So, welcome everyone to this meeting. This is the meeting organised by the Linke Berlin Internationals. Normally we meet in more intimate surroundings, but because of the interest in this meeting, we've moved into a big room. More about that later. We have, as well, I guess you know who we have because that's why you're here. Hossam el-Hamalawy is a Egyptian journalist and an activist. It's kind of a shame that he's here because he should be in Egypt where it's not safe for him at the moment. But he was one of the leading activists within the Tahrir Square occupations in 2011 and was the go-to person in terms of the writing reports and analysis of what was happening. He's going to speak for about half an hour on what's left of the Arab Spring. There's then going to be plenty of time for anybody to ask questions or make their own contributions. We want to be out of here at 9, and then we'll go to a local pub where we can carry on the discussion in more, close circumstances. My name's, I'm Phil Button, I'm one of the speakers of the Berlin Internationals. If you want to know more about what we do, you can leave us your email address and join our mailing list. Okay. We'll start with Hossam. Oh, people are coming in. But this meeting is being filmed. The cameras are pointing forward, so if you don't want to be filmed, that's no problem. But later, when people are making contributions, let us know if you don't want to be caught on camera, and we'll organise that you're not. And we'll put the video online as soon as we can. Right, Hossam.
Okay. Thanks a lot for coming tonight. I'm really humbled by this great turnout. And I would like to thank Phil for helping to organize this meeting. And we'll be playing a slideshow as we go on. I don't know about you, but my social media feeds have been cluttered over the past couple of weeks with the 10 years challenge. And apart from the largely embarrassing photos of family members and friends, I came also across photos like these. Phil, can you please? Which in part could sum up what many in Egypt and outside feel towards what's left of the Arab Spring. 8 years after we had a fantastic, impressive revolution against Hosni Mubarak, the military dictator who ruled this country with an iron fist for 30 years, we ended up with even a worse dictator, Abdel Fattah al-Sisi. At the moment, Egypt is literally an open-air prison with at least 60,000 political prisoners languishing in jails. 17 new prisons at least have been built since the coup. Horrible massacres happened in the year of 2013 following the military coup. And as soon as Sisi became officially the president, during his first term, the first 4 years, we did a study, which you will find here in the infographics that I've left around. Basically, the government, the police and the army are killing on average 2.2 Egyptian citizens per day. 2 Egyptian citizens are also dying per week in custody, whether it's in prisons or in the detention facilities. Hundreds of activists have been slapped with travel bans, so they can't leave the country at the moment. People are disappearing, and sometimes after they disappear, they show up, or their corpses, photos show up on the Facebook page of our military spokesperson as people killed in clashes. So overall, I mean, there is definitely a massive disappointment among so many Egyptians. Phil? This is also another picture that I came across in my feeds, but these were mainly circulated by Syrian regime bots that are trying to discredit or attack the Arab Spring. But in part, it can also sum up how a great part of the people, or a majority, not a majority, but like a good number of people feel towards how the Arab Spring ended up in these countries. In Libya, which witnessed a genuine revolt against the dictator Muammar Gaddafi in 2011, was followed by NATO intervention and airstrikes. And 8 years later, the country is in a very bad shape. It's not really in a good shape. Islamic extremists, some of them are affiliated with Al-Qaeda and others with ISIS, did control parts of the country for long periods of time, or were at least active and they had strong presence. Other parts of the country are controlled or dominated by tribal militias. And in the east, and great chunks of the country is now controlled by Libya's strongman, Field Marshal Haftar, who is backed by the UAE and backed by Egypt in his own war on terror and war on illegal migration, all of these between quotes, of course. And in leaked videos that surfaced online, you can see that the behavior of his troops are really no better than ISIS or no better than Gaddafi, the former dictator, in terms of extrajudicial killings, executions, and what have you. In Yemen, Yemen is another tragic story where a genuine revolt broke out in the beginning of 2011 against Ali Abdullah Saleh, the dictator of Yemen. He tried to crush the revolt with the help of Saudi Arabia in the beginning, but when the regime was on the verge of collapse, Saudi Arabia tried to provide a safe exit for Ali Abdullah Saleh in exchange for a transitional government that will basically continue the old regime's policies, but under different names. And this was all happening in the midst of an insurgency by the Shia rebels, the Houthis, who've managed to take over the capital. And this was the excuse that Saudi Arabia and the UAE and the so-called alliance used in order to start bombing Yemen back to the Stone Age. And I think, I mean, you're all following the news about some of the worst humanitarian disasters now on the face of the planet does exist in Yemen. And I will spare you the graphic photos of the dying Yemeni children. In Syria, Syria is probably the most tragic, story of the Arab Spring whenever we bring it up. What started as also a very genuine revolt against the Ba'ath regime and the dictator Bashar al-Assad in 2011 was met with live ammunition, was met with sheer brutality, was met with medieval style of torture in prisons, was met with aerial bombings. And increasingly, the revolution was cornered and pushed towards militarization. And what went on in the following years, people can disagree whether it was like a civil war, a sectarian war, still that had elements also of rebellion and revolutionary elements against the regime. But today, in 2019, it cannot be really looked at as a success story. It's among the most tragic ones. This is the forgotten revolution that very few people, tend to bring out for a long list of reasons. This is Bahrain, that also witnessed a genuine mass movement from below in 2011 against the autocrat Hamad, the ruling monarch. This movement included Sunni and Shiites, together. But this mass movement was met with sheer brutality, with live ammunition. And not only that, but Hamad invited the GCC countries, the Gulf countries, and their troops, their joint troops, to intervene in Bahrain and to help him quell the uprising. Today, Bahrain is in a very bad shape in terms of revolutionary politics. Thousands are languishing in prisons. Death sentences are being showered like rain showers from the sky. Activists are being stripped of their citizenship and they are expelled to Iraq. It's definitely also a very tragic story. The only country that people tend to present as a success model is Tunisia. Tunisia, the cradle of the Arab Spring, that's where the Arab Spring started in December 2010. And it's usually cited as a success story because it didn't turn into a military conflict. It didn't witness the large-scale massacres that happened in the other countries that witnessed uprisings. And there are democratic elections. I mean, you can definitely, vote over there, unlike other countries where it is merely ceremonial or it doesn't even exist. And there were some significant reforms, at least in the area of women's rights in Tunisia. But the real story might be a little bit different. Tunisia, the political establishment rests on a very uneasy alliance between members of the old regime and the Islamists over there who are reformists, ex-Muslim Brotherhood, or they come from the same tendency. It's a very long story to go into these complicated details. At least in the question of social justice, many Tunisians are disillusioned with soaring unemployment, with soaring economic inequalities, and the same neoliberal policies that were enacted under Ben Ali are actually continuing under the sponsorship of the IMF and the World Bank. So I mean, with this, this might look like a bleak picture, and I'm not trying to treat it otherwise. It is a very difficult situation. However, I'm still hopeful, and my hopes are not based on wishful thinking or some revolutionary fantasies that I have in my head, but it's based on the laws of history and it's based on the laws of revolutions. And the law number one is that revolution is not just a moment. الثورة ليست لحظة. This is a graffiti from downtown Cairo in 2011 that expresses this point. Revolutions usually take everyone by surprise. You have the most famous example, historical example of Lenin in January 1917 addressing his party members saying that it's not my generation that's going to witness the revolution, it's yours. 1 month later, the Russian Revolution breaks out. On the morning of the 25th of January 2011, none of the main organizers in the Egyptian revolution, believed that, it's Revolution Day, or it's starting today. Actually, whenever anyone on that day would approach me and tell me that, are we starting a revolution today? I would say, chill out, no revolutions break out by Facebook events. And our ceiling of demands on the beginning of the revolution, at least, was just the impeachment of the interior minister and holding, police officers accountable for the torture that was happening. But the chant, the people want the downfall of the regime, came later. It did not start like that. Revolutions do not happen out of the blue. And if a revolution breaks out somewhere, this means that there was already a process with years and sometimes decades preceding it. And the revolutions in that case are basically the climax. Can we please? Egypt in the 1990s, I will take the example of Egypt, quickly. Egypt in the 1990s, basically Mubarak had managed to crush all forms of dissent under the guise of the war on terror. No street protests were happening. As student activists, we couldn't even mention Mubarak's name. You can at best talk about the government. Mubarak was a huge taboo. Once you left your university campus, you were risking live ammunition being shot at you. No labor strikes was happening. But the turning point came in the year 2000 with the outbreak of the Palestinian Intifada. And the Palestinian Intifada suddenly started this process of street politics revival. For the first time in probably 2 decades, Egyptians in the thousands were taking to the streets in solidarity with the Palestinians. This was followed by the war on Iraq, which revived street politics even more. So this is happening in the year 2000, 2001, 2002, 2003. All of these mobilizations evolved into the anti-Mubarak movement, Kifaya, which is Arabic for enough, in the year 2004, 2005, 2006. And although Kifaya was largely confined as a middle-class movement, but airing those visuals of the protests to the rest of the population, whether it's via satellite channels or the rising independent media in Egypt, indirectly made the militancy spill over to the rest of the population. So that's when we started the winter of labor discontent in December 2006 by the famous strike in Ghazl al-Mahalla, which is the largest textile mill in the Middle East. The winter of labor discontent continued. Strikes were happening in all sectors, not just the textile sector. And that's in 2006, 2007. By 2008, we already had 2 mini uprisings in Egypt. One was in April 2008 in Mahalla, that's from where the picture is. And the other one did not receive as much coverage, but it was no less important. It was in the city of El-Brollos, north of Egypt. And this accumulation of militancy and dissent kept on piling up until the explosion happened in 2011 in Egypt with the Egyptian revolution. This is a photo I took in my neighborhood on the morning of the January 29th in front of the police station after the police opened fire on our march. What I'm trying to say, what I'm trying to say here is that in Egypt, in Yemen, in Syria, in Libya, in Tunisia, in all of these countries that witnessed uprisings, these did not happen out of the blue, suddenly. Each country of those had its own process for years. Maybe foreign journalists who were based in these countries did not notice it and they did not tell you about it because they are usually obsessed with news about terrorism or news about archaeological, findings. Maybe political activists themselves who were present in these countries could not see things that were fermenting beneath the surface. But any country that witnessed an uprising was going through its own process. And yes, the revolutions in these countries, I would say, have been defeated. I'm not gonna, some people try to find like other expressions to go around it, but I would say that at least this wave of revolutions that happened in Yemen, in Syria, in Bahrain, in Egypt, and Libya got defeated, and in the case of Tunisia, I would say it got co-opted or diffused, more or less. But the same reasons that pushed those countries into a revolution, they still exist. These revolutions did not just break out because of some conspiracy in the air. These revolutions were triggered by the question of social justice. These revolutions were triggered by the question of police brutality and by political repression. Each country definitely has its own conditions and has its own specific concrete demands, but these were the common denominator that instigated this wave of the Arab Spring. Some activists don't like to use the term Arab Spring because they feel it gives the impression that, something happened in Tunisia and the following day, all the Arabs were just copycatting it out of context, which is not true. Each country went through its own development. Now, if the reasons that pushed those countries into a revolt are still there, and the counter-revolutionary regimes that came to crush those revolutions and reached power are not addressing those problems, actually they are aggravating it more and more, this means that there could be a potential in the future for a revolutionary revival. But I'm sorry to say this is not going to happen anytime soon. This revolutionary recovery in countries like Egypt or Yemen or elsewhere, it's not going to happen anytime soon. Number one, because the peoples in these countries have paid a very heavy price. There is a huge death toll. Thousands have been killed. Thousands have been imprisoned. Thousands have been tortured. The economy is in shambles. The revolutionary organizations and the independent unions that spearheaded those revolts have been largely crushed. And it will take a long time in order to rebuild those structures again. But there is another factor, not just the repression. This factor is hope and confidence. The people in those countries that witnessed the counter-revolutions and this wave of repression, they have to have some level of confidence that if they try again, it will work this time. And this will take some time, you know, for this confidence to be regained, but not just time. They need to see a successful model somewhere close to them. And that's where other countries in the region come into the picture. Each Arab country that did not witness an uprising, a proper uprising, you know, like what happened in Egypt or elsewhere, is and has been also going through its own development or has been going through its own process. Now, this process is not like, you know, I mean, some ABCD manual. It's not the same manual for every country. In some cases, countries are faster than the other in terms of political development for a long list of reasons. But at the same time, each country is going and has been going through its own political process of development, of revolutionary development, and it hasn't yet reached that stage of uprising. And this could happen in the future, and this is not some utopian or wishful thinking. Since 2014, by mid-2014, I have to say, like, I myself, I fell into depression. I was like, game over for us in Egypt for now. Even after the coup, by the end of, or by July 2013, I still had hope that at least we can resist, you know, I mean, the return of the military, and still there could be hope for us to mobilize against it. By mid-2014, I had honestly lost hope. And at the time, I kept 3 countries on my watch list, basically, because these were the ones where I was placing my hopes. Sudan, surprisingly for some, might be Jordan, and Morocco. This doesn't mean that there is something really unique about those 3 countries, and I might turn out to be wrong, but at the same time, according to the situation that I've been monitoring across the region, these were the 3 countries that had potential still to carry out or to witness a revolution. And indeed, I don't know if you're following the news at the moment, Sudan is finally going through its own revolution. This doesn't mean that it also happened out of the blue. The Sudanese, by the way, they have a long, and they are proud of it, they have a long tradition of resistance against military dictatorships. They had a very famous revolution in 1964 against the first military dictatorship they had following independence. They had another revolution in 1985. And after the outbreak of the Arab Spring, Sudan did witness protests in 2011 and in 2012. But a stronger wave of protests started in September 2013, which was I mean, I would say it's like a mini uprising. It was very close to a revolutionary situation. And since last December, the Sudanese have been going through a new wave, a new revolutionary wave. At the moment, Omar al-Bashir is, I mean, yesterday he was in Egypt in talks with the Sisi. Before that, he was in Qatar trying to get some money. And, you know, all the Arab countries, even those who don't like one another and they are in fights, like, you know, the UAE, Qatar, all of them are like, you know, I mean, saying, we are for the stability of Sudan, we do support Omar al-Bashir, because no one wants another revolution from those guys. And imagine this, if the Sudanese manage to topple Omar al-Bashir, which I think it's highly likely to happen, that could be the start of shifting the balance a little bit to the side of revolution in the region, away from the counter-revolution. I can see already, I mean, in my social media feeds, all Egyptians, or like a big number of Egyptians, they're all following what's happening in Sudan, drawing parallels, and saying, well, you know, this reminds us of something that happened in this country a few years ago, and hopes are running high, I have to say. Not that I'm trying to imply that if the revolution succeeds in Sudan, the following day something is going to happen in Egypt. As I told you, the process of recovery is going to take some time. It's not going to happen anytime soon. But the success of revolutions in the region might speed up this recovery. The second country is Jordan. And this came as I mean, it was a little bit of a surprise to me, I mean, a few years ago, because for long list of reasons, I've been dismissive of Jordan in terms of a potential for any revolutionary change. For a long list of reasons, which, I mean, are honestly irrelevant now because obviously I was wrong. Jordan did have protests, did witness protests in 2011 and 2012. Some of them were really strong. But then last summer, in June, mass mobilization in the capital and in the provinces started over the taxation law. This was the spark. But then during that movement, many other demands were put up. I mean, about a true constitutional monarchy, about political reforms in the country, about the situation of political detainees, and whether that, you know, it's we're not just content with the king coming up every now and then to give amnesty to political detainees. Let's have the rule of law. And I saw videos with my own, you know, I mean, eyes, and I could hear chants against the king, which is not the first time to happen in Jordan, but it's very rare that, you know, the ceiling would be as high as chanting for the downfall of Abdullah. Now, the king moved quickly. He also, I mean, met with Sisi, met with the GCC, you know, I mean, countries, tried to get more money in order to inject in the economy and diffuse the situation a little bit. He impeached the government, brought in a new government, but that new government isn't really doing much change from its predecessor. So a renewed wave started in December that was met with real sheer brutality. And although things have calmed down a little bit, but I would urge you to keep an eye on Jordan. The third country is Morocco. Morocco did witness also, I mean, it has been also going through its own process over the past years prior to 2011. It did witness protests in 2011, 2012, which were then diffused or quelled using a mixture of both like repression and promises of reform, only to be renewed, you know, I mean, later in 2017. I don't know how many of you have been following Hirak al-Rif in Morocco, where thousands and thousands on the streets. I mean, this is just like, you know, I mean, one picture of it. But if you go on YouTube, I mean, you will find tons of videos. This movement, I mean, they did put forward many demands, I mean, related to austerity, related to marginalization, related to the lack of social services. related to things related to the identity of the Amazigh. Also, I mean, in Morocco. And although it has been quelled with severe dose of repression, and it did not get the enough coverage it deserves in the Arab world, because basically since, I mean, Morocco was in good terms with Qatar, so, I mean, Al Jazeera did not cover, I mean, the protests, or was very conservative in its coverage. And the last point, and I will stop here, is, I mean, Palestine. For over half a century, the Palestinian cause has been one of the major politicizing and radicalizing factors for the Arab people in the region. I mean, I personally got into politics as a young kid, you know, via the Palestinian Solidarity Movement. They continue to act as a source of inspiration in the same way that there is an umbilical cord between 2011 and the year 2000 that witnessed the outbreak of the Second Palestinian Intifada. There is also an umbilical cord between the 1977 revolution in Egypt and also the Palestinian cause. If you, I mean, this is not discussed much, but 1977, our Bread Uprising in January 1977, was the climax of a political revolutionary process that was started by supporters of the Palestinian Revolution Society on university campuses in the beginning of the 1970s. That's, in the end, that's what culminated with 1977. And by the way, at the time, 1977 in Egypt, 1978, the Tunisians had a workers' uprising led by the unions. 1997, that's, sorry, 1979, that's when the Iranian Revolution also happened. And the whole region was in turmoil at the time. This is another Arab Spring that you don't hear much about. When revolutions happen in anywhere, they do spread by the domino effect. And the defeats, they also spread by the domino effects. So maybe I'll just stop here to take your question and feedback, and then we'll come back later. Thank you. Thank you.